first landed at a ranch at Corona, New Mexico. The rancher turned it over to the Air Force. Rancher W.W. Brazil was the man who discovered the saucer.
What I thought was a star began coming in my direction at a very rapid rate of speed.
The unidentified object, which some sources thought might be a blimp, moved slowly down the Pacific coast from Santa Monica and disappeared south of Long Beach.
I saw a UFO, and it went down the river, turned right at the United Nations, turned left, and then down the river.
UFO classified. UFO classified. No more plausible deniability. Fact, fiction, or the truth. You decide. And now, the new voice of the high desert, the hostess of UFO Classified, Erica Lukes.
Good afternoon, good evening, my friends. I'm Erica Lukes. Always happy to be here and to get into chat and see my favorite people tuning in. Thank you so much for all you do to support the show. You mean the world to me. I also want to share some really great news. This week I received more information for my archives, and I've had several other people reach out to me, and they are sending me their research, their things, so I can add it to my archive that is publicly accessible in a commercial space. I'm very excited about that. If you know of anyone who is thinking about donating any material, please let me know. There are people like myself, like Barry Greenwood, Jan Aldrich, who have been on the show before many times, who are working to preserve history and to archive it and to get this to a good place where people can have access to it, where history won't be forgotten, where researchers that are jumping into the field can learn and expand and hopefully make some much needed changes in the field of ufology. We need that. We're going to talk about that tonight. I also have to just tease you a little bit because I just landed a radio show that has not been done before. I mean, not with guests that are coming on. This is going to be a groundbreaking interview from people you have not heard from, that you want to hear from. And I wish I could tell you more. It might have to do with a place in Utah. I'll just throw that out there so you can think about that. I also want to say that there will be, from what I understand, a couple more bombshells making their way to the public with regard to my favorite organization, or not, but things are happening. They're picking up pace now. More people are coming forward. They're getting in contact with me and others about some of the misdeeds that we have seen at the hands of the Mutual UFO Network. And from what you know, from what I've had past guests on my show that have been involved with MUFON, they have expressed their concerns about the way they were treated in the organization, the intimidation, the bullying tactics have been a long-standing way of business at MUFON, and we will address that a little bit too. But look, just hang on to your hats because it's going to be a wild ride in the next few weeks. My guest this evening is someone that I was introduced to through two of my colleagues and friends, Paul Dean and Greg Bishop. Greg Bishop had Christian Lambright on his show, and you can go to Radio Mysterioso and listen to that. It's a great show. Greg is an excellent host. And they both have very similar areas of study, things that they've researched. Christian is a former investigator for CUFOS, the Center for UFO Studies, and a contributor to the Computer UFO Network. He holds a degree in psychology from Baylor University and works in computer technology, internet services, and graphic arts and illustration. He wrote a book called X Descending, and that is about two startling films and the facts behind them that reveal once and for all the existence of an incredible technology behind the UFO phenomenon. As no other book has ever done, this X Descending, it's a book you could all go get this on Kindle tonight. I would recommend doing that. Documents how a private study of unpublished daylight multi-witness UFO movies filmed by a veteran, one Ray Stanford, resulted in a major aerospace propulsion breakthrough. And this is wonderful. Ray's been on the show as well, and just a brilliant man. We're going to learn more about him tonight. And then also we're going to talk about the Paul Benowitz case. with the involvement of Richard Doty and some of these things. This book, X Descending, is incredible. Christian, welcome to the show. I've really enjoyed getting to know you.
Hi, Erica. How are you?
I'm just fabulous now that I'm here with you and my friends are tuning in. And I know we're going to have a good show tonight. I love listening to you, and I've loved reading your book. And you don't do a lot, of interviews, and so I appreciate you coming out and doing this interview with me. And this will be really good for people to understand the gravity of your work.
Gravity, that's a good one. Yeah, well,
I have a lot of free time. I like to think of these statements. What can I say?
Well, it's an interesting subject, and I guess I'm one of those that, you suddenly realize I'm one of the older people in it now. At one time, I was one of the younger ones. But I guess it's funny to think back on the times that the people that I met who've now passed on, that now we're all getting up there. And as we were talking about earlier, it's like it's been 50 years, and how far has it actually progressed in 50 years? I don't know. I mean, the facts are out there somewhere, I think, and that's one of the points that I would like people to take away just from reading the book, even though I focused on 2 films. And one of the points that I think people need to understand is why those 2 films. The films themselves are individual films, of course, the one Ray took and the one Paul Benowitz took. But along the way, I found that there were connections that led me back to the Air Force Research Lab, Air Force Weapons Lab, Air Force Propulsion Directorate, which it just struck me as highly unusual, highly coincidental, that behind them would be those. But so those are how I chose those 2 films. And plus they're ones that I'd had time, of course, to talk to Paul Benowitz many times and hear his story of how he got them. And then meeting Ray Stanford and having seen before computers were even prevalent anywhere, I had driven down to Austin and met Ray. I had met him a few years before at I think it was a MUFON symposium in San Antonio, and we had a mutual interest in Socorro. But I drove down to meet him, and it turned out he must have gotten the film that I just talk about in the book like 5 months or 6 months before I walked in to his home, and he put him up on a slide screen. And I mean, I understand when people who've not had a chance to really see the evidence that Ray's got, but I'm telling you, obviously there have been a lot more people to see the films than most people realize. And it changed my thinking on a lot of things, especially technology being here, that I don't think under any circumstances now anyone can say, oh, it was some secret development back in 1985. And here all these years later, you don't see anything like that even to this day. And even anyway, it's discussed in the book, but I hope, the idea is that there is a technology here, and I wish we'd all get together on it. I wish technology, whatever you want to call it, get together working on it.
I dare to dream, and I oftentimes feel like Don Quixote running into, the big windmills. But I mean, it's there's so much potential, and we're really in a critical time right now, with older researchers passing away, and with YouTube and things like that, where people can get on there and manipulate the story that gets out there. I mean, just flat out lie, the secret space program and the jump rooms to Venus or whatever, anybody's doing. I mean, some of this absolute nonsense, and a younger generation, that's where they're getting their information. And so we've got to step it up.
Yeah, that's true. It used to be, if you were trying to make money off of this, you either had to write a book and then go on a tour, and you'd see the few people who happen to show up at the tour. These days with YouTube, anybody can sit down and just come up with anything they want and just post it out there. And the more, crazy or interesting you can make it sound, you make money off of it. So people make lots of money just yanking everyone's chain over to the latest and greatest, when if you looked at it and thought, well, even if it was, my way of putting it was, even if it was the ambassador from the Pleiades flying by in his ship, you're not going to prove anything with that video. You're not going to prove anything with something that might be a bug. But people word it up, stunning, startling video, startling scene. And I don't know, I guess it's the same reason people put TV shows on that are aliens this and ancient aliens that. And you realize that all they're really trying to do is to get you to sit there long enough to get the commercial in front of you. And it doesn't really matter what's true or not. That's not the purpose. And I wish people would stop and look at it and say, okay, what's the real goal? It's not a documentary. You're not interviewing people whose faces you're seeing that are credible people. And unfortunately, I think we still have a lot of that my pet peeve is just the term UFO, which leaves everything open. Mm-hmm. Nobody seems to narrow it down, but something needs to change, I suppose. If we're going to these days of activism, that's what we need. Some people who are doing activism in the right way, I guess you'd say, but still.
Well, it's challenging. And I think the one thing that I have seen, you get people that are so secure in their speaking gigs, and getting out on the lecture circuit and book sales and all of this stuff that, none of them want to rock the boat. I mean, they're complaining about MUFON and having, Corey Good at a conference, but yet they're still accepting invitations to go speak instead of standing up and saying, no, I'm not going to do that. It's a matter of integrity. And you just, if nobody's willing to stand up and make a change, then this continual dog and pony show will just keep on keeping on.
Yeah, it's numbers. I suspect these conferences that are held where you have speakers from all over the map, and I'm not going to make claims about knowing something that is someone else's expertise that mine isn't. Whatever, someone wants to speak about and whatever people are interested in, that's fine. But if you have a conference that covers everything, it's like the Las Vegas Strip. You've got everything out there for people to go see, and it gets the numbers in, and everybody thinks it's one big party, and it makes money. And people who go to I actually can kind of understand the idea that you may not like where or you're invited to go speak, but at some point you have to pay the bills. Now, you're right. There should be some level of integrity at which there are certain things you won't do for the money. But it's kind of the phrase I think that I used when I was expressing these thoughts in the book is that these people that are out here pimping to a paying public, they will tell you whatever you want to hear. And the public that wants something, and I don't know whether it's something to look forward to or something to believe in because you just don't know, and it's more interesting than going home and staring at the walls or whatnot. I don't know. I think there's a lot of reasons why people buy into things that on the face of it you would think seem absurd. And everybody's entitled, everybody's picks their own poison, so to speak. But still, I agree with you that there's something to me, and I'll just put it this way. It's like the whole to the stars thing. I have a lot of respect for Hal Puthoff. I don't think he would put his name behind something that wasn't based in a solid idea that was, like everything else that we've been talking about. So whatever anybody might say, whatever we don't know, just because we don't know what they're doing, we were talking about this earlier, there's a point at which you just don't want to hear the naysayers and get the trolls involved. And so you just kind of stay off the posts and stay off Facebook, and you don't publicize what you're doing just because you don't want to hear it. Unfortunately, it breeds questions from people who are frustrated because they haven't had a chance to see it or to know what you're doing, or people begin to speculate on what's really going on. And unfortunately, some of that might be going on. You just don't know. But so what's the public going to do? The point is, are you going to sit and wonder about what someone else is doing, or do you decide, you got to make your own path of some sort? But everybody work together.
Well, that would be the seventh sign of the apocalypse, to be quite honest. But and I think that's why both of us have kind of gone underground in a lot of ways, and we have a handful of people that we trust and respect, and other than that, that's about it for me. Because, geez, this is a crazy field, and lots of fragile egos and bad behavior, and then you have the the disinformation, and then people in the intelligence community inserting themselves into the narrative. And I mean, there's a lot going on. This is a really tricky subject to wade through.
Yeah, sounds like politics these days, right? You don't know who's saying what and why, and where's it coming from, and is it real or is it fake news, or is it just somebody trying to, manipulate people into feeling a certain way so they'll end up voting a certain way? And in this case, yeah, I don't know. I mean, you're right, though. That's why I generally just have a few people that I talk to and deal with, and I wrote the book to say something that I thought might be information other people should have, because if you don't speak up, people won't even be able to find you. I mean, and but even so, at this point, if you stick your head up and try to do something positive, it seems like invariably there are certain people, and you don't know why, the people who just seem to want to come down on you and shout you down, or somehow you're stealing their limelight, or I don't know what motivates people. But to me, that's a big thing, the motivation.
Yes, yeah, and that's something I think we all need to question people's motivations in this subject. I know I've certainly had a gut full of things that I've been going through, but it's interesting, and the motivations there I'm still trying to figure out. But I'm really glad that there are people who are brave enough to come forward and who really want to make a change. And I've said this before, and you and I were talking about Phil Leach, who's dropped a lot of bombshells and exposed some corrupt practices at MUFON. And I think more people need to be like that. And I commend him. And he's in chat. So I just want to give him a shout out.
Well, at what point is enough? How much is enough? At some point, you just decide this isn't what I joined for, or this isn't what I signed up for, and this is not living up to even the supposed, your motto, your purpose. If it's supposed to be educational, then you're supposed to tell people. And as we talked about before, I mean, I don't have any issue with someone who's wrong. I mean, find out something, at some point we've all been wrong. If at least you step up quickly and admit it when you know it, and don't try to just stand your ground and back up something. If you just say, hey, that was an idea that I had at one point and it was wrong, and now this is going on. But I don't know. I don't understand why people, I don't know. I guess not everyone's moral compass always points north. Maybe it's variable depending on what they want, where they want it to point. But
you're not kidding about that.
Yeah. And the sad part about it is, especially having some background in psychology, and I don't profess to know everything there is. My father was a psychiatrist, so I did get some of it growing up. But at the end of the day, you begin to realize, that not everybody is wired the same way. There are some people who, you can look at the news and there are things happening right now when you wonder to yourself, why would somebody do that? Why would you'll lose everything if it comes out. But I don't know, some people seem to adhere to different ideas of what's right and moral, or what's justifiable. Right.
And I think, unfortunately, in this community, and as we've seen with some of the latest MUFON bombshells, they're, the board of directors and the executive director, they turn a blind eye, to some of the potentially pretty, there could be something there that could really shut MUFON down with some of the behavior, and they just turn a blind eye. And the people that are abusing others continue to abuse. And so we've created this nice little safe niche where everybody will, protect the bullies, and things work smoothly so organizations or people can make money and use other people.
You're right, and that's the difficult part, when you think you shouldn't, at least explain yourself. Express, maybe there's something we don't know for why someone is doing what they're doing or behaving the way they're behaving. Explain it. If you don't have all the facts, great, you'll learn. The sad part about it is, unfortunately, whatever they say about the job market these days, if that's part of your paycheck, it does make it difficult to stand up and do what Phil Leach did. I'm not saying he was getting paid, but to realize you're going to be cut out the minute you express, yourself on something, or the minute you speak up against the people who, wherever your paycheck is. And I guess the top levels of people at MUFON do get compensation. And it's been, boy, I wish somebody would pay me to do what I'm doing.
Right.
My interest in this, but I'm just not. And I think to some extent, I do remember several instances in which my father just wouldn't take it. He would stood up on his own. And that's part of the reason we basically got run out of Indonesia, was because you stand up for what's right. Whatever the consequences are, you don't sacrifice your own character and dignity and morality and cow to other pressure from other places. So we need more people who will stand up and at least, say what's on their mind and clear the air.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And speaking of Indonesia, I would love it if you would tell the audience about what your parents witnessed.
Okay. I know we're coming up on a break here, so I'll try to make it quick. We were talking about the fact that I myself have never seen anything that I would qualify to anyone as a UFO. But at one point, I had an interest in, and still do, in the Papua New Guinea case, the Father Gill case. And I had mentioned to my mother about it, and she said, "Oh, that was about the time when we had the experience sitting outside with people in Indonesia." And apparently, because there wasn't a lot of electricity at that moment, at the time, on the east end of the island where we were, in a little town called Kediri, and the mayor had a party, and there were about 30 people outside sitting on chairs watching a film being shown on a screen outdoors. And suddenly my mother said they realized, holy cow, some large circular bright object just drifted in over the tops of the coconut trees and slowed down, and for the moment was kind of above where everybody's sitting out on the lawn, and was just there for a few moments and then moved off slowly, in a different direction. And they kind of laughed and said, well, it must have been wanting to see what the movie was. But I know my parents very well, and they didn't ever, as I said, it was surprising to me that they said afterwards not many people seemed to talk about it. But I checked with my father on it, what my mother told me, and sure enough, he verified it. They just thought, oh, wow, look, that's a UFO. And
interesting.
Kind of it. But at that point in time, the planes did not land on Jakarta was the only city that had an airport back in those days. And so at that time, there should have been nothing down there that would be flying in low over the tops of the coconut trees. And that was definitely a UFO sighting, if nothing else. And of course, that helped to pique my interest a little bit. So,
so interesting. And I want to learn more about that and learn about your times with QFOS, because that's really interesting. You've met some fascinating people and had great experiences. And I want to tell my audience, please go to Amazon Kindle. You can get X Descending, which is about two extraordinary films that reveal lies, deception, and truth about unidentified flying objects. My guest tonight is Christian Lambert. We will be right back.
Stand by.
This is UFO Classified with Erica Lukes.
Erica Lukes.
The phone lines are open now at 702-425-9230. That's 702-425-9230. Worldwide callers use Skype name KCOR Radio. More UFO Classified.
UFO Classified.
With Erica Lukes on the KCOR Digital Radio Network. After this.
Hello, KCOR listeners. Lorian Fenton here, inviting you to join me at UFO MegaCon, a new 7-day and 8-night immersion event from the original producers of the world's largest and longest UFO conferences in recent history. There will be 50 speakers, UFO military witness whistleblowers, award-winning filmmakers, and special guests discussing all things UFO, alien, and disclosure. UFO MegaCon will premiere never-heard-before speakers bringing you new and amazing information. There will be experiencer groups, Skywatch's musical entertainment, and even a game show with George Norrie. Join me at UFO MegaCon March 24th through 30th in Laughlin, Nevada. Truly the one and only conference you need to attend this year. Check it out at UFOMegaCon.com. That's UFOMegaCon.com.
Now, broadcasting in digital HD radio. Toxins are everywhere, from the air we breathe to the food we eat and the water we drink. In a world where 80,000 known toxins and heavy metals threaten our very existence, how are you going to protect yourself and your loved ones? Introducing Pure Body Extra Strength, the world's first colloidal zeolite that helps trap and remove toxins as well as heavy metals from your body that are messing with your memory, clarity, sleep, and focus. Don't just take our word for it or the testimonials from our thousands of happy customers. Check out the hundreds of articles and case studies on the National Institute of Health website proving zeolite's powerful ability to remove toxins. For a limited time, listeners to KCOR will receive 10% off their first order. To get started, go to trypurebody.com and enter promo code RADIO10. Again, that's trypurebody.com. Toxic junk is all around us, but now you can take back control of your health and protect yourself by detoxing with Pure Body Extra Strength. You'll be on your way to sleeping better, thinking more clearly, and feeling more energetic. Go to trypurebody.com right now and get started today.
Friday night, 9 p.m. Pacific. Jump onto the Celestial Highway and travel at the speed of light into hyperspace. Hyperspace. Hosted by Solaris Blue Raven. She navigates you through the cosmic tides of mysticism into the world of covert technology, UFOs, mystical sciences, and the world of unforeseen forces.
You get to really sort of enjoy a bizarre ride.
Listen live, Friday night, 9 p.m. Pacific, for Hyperspace, the one show that blows the whistle off our government black ops projects. Hyperspace, hosted by Solaris Blue Raven. Exclusively on the KCOR Digital Radio Network.
Want to take a ride? Are you ready to go? It's showtime! You're listening to the KCOR Digital Radio Network.
Broadcasting from the heart of Las Vegas, Nevada.
Their base is so large it has to draw most of its power from the nearby nuclear fusion plant.
The future of radio is here and now.
You're listening to
UFO Classified with Erica Lukes, where the truth isn't hidden beneath the black lines of a Sharpie.
That's the craziest thing I've ever heard.
To be on with Erica, call 702-425-9230. That's 702-425-9230. Worldwide callers use Skype name KCOR Radio.
Radio contact.
Share your thoughts on the show on Twitter by using hashtag KCOR. Or head over to the live chats at KCORradio.com.
The audience goes nuts.
And now, your host of UFO Classified.
Are you ready?
Erica Lukes.
Welcome back and happy Fantopia Friday. I'm Erica Lukes. Always happy to spend my Friday night here with all of you. Thanks for getting in there. I want to say hello to Tracy. We are going to be getting together hopefully in the next couple weeks and we can chat about all things paranormal. I want to thank Northern UFOs for always being so supportive. Bruce Cornett, I really appreciate all that you do for me above and beyond just tuning in every week. You're the reason that I'm here, and I'm so proud to have an audience that is respectful and intelligent and kind. It really gives me hope for the future of ufology, which is a little questionable at the moment, but hey, that's okay. I'm talking tonight with Christian Lambright, who is an author, a researcher, and he's done a tremendous amount with regards to working with Ray Stanford. And Ray is a fascinating, intelligent individual who has really broken a lot of ground in many, many different areas. He also, as he mentioned previously, has worked with and talked with Benowitz quite frequently for a time, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that. But when we went to break, we were mentioning, he was talking about his parents and their sighting in Indonesia, and that was fascinating. And so I welcome back. Where I know that you had a couple different things that spurred you into really researching this, but I want to talk about how you got involved with the Center for UFO Studies.
Well, I met Dr. Hynek through my friend Tommy Bland, who had been at this longer than I was. I met Tom when I was actually in college at Baylor and was taking a course in parapsychology and met Tom through some articles he'd written in some of the magazines that came out. He was actually very close to Waco at the time. And it turned out he and his wife Linda had been good friends with Dr. Hynek for a long time. How that came about, I don't even recall. But I mean, we're talking really good friends. Tom called him, that sort of thing. And of course, I learned a lot more through Tommy and met a lot of people through him. Unfortunately, he's still angry at me right now over something, so I haven't talked to him in a while, but he's a smart guy, knows lots of things and lots of people. But met Hynek through him, and in fact, at one point, Dr. Hynek had come to Dallas to give a talk somewhere at a museum or something, and so Tom and his wife Linda and we all went, and it was, I just remember it was funny to this day because he had given the talk, and after it was over, as he's walking through the main lobby of this place with whoever the people were there, and there's Tom and Linda. And he goes, "Hey, Tom and Linda," and he just left the other people. He just walked over and was like, "Well, let's go get something to drink." I think he wanted hot chocolate. And we just walked out, went to a Denny's, which I thought, well, he must have felt at home with them because he just walked, and we sat and talked, and it was really just, you know, a relaxing little conversation, and very much an average sort of guy, very interesting. And of course, he always had a very unique way of speaking. But subsequent to that, I guess I'd never been a joiner per se. I mean, just especially, not to say anything negative about MUFON so much, but years ago I had wanted to find some information, and I wrote to Walt Andrus, and the first thing I got back was this membership packet, with a card. Join, here's the card, here's the membership. And I remember thinking, he doesn't know anything about me. I mean, I don't know why that just kind of hit me wrong. Maybe I'm just not being a joiner to begin with anyway. But I also realized that the more I had wanted to look into incidents and cases in the area here in Texas where I was, that it does give you a little bit of a leg up, to say you're with some group rather than you're just some Joe Blow who contacts people and wants to talk to them about something they saw. And at that point, QFOS was because of Dr. Hynek himself. And having met him and realizing this is a guy with a good reputation and serious-minded. And so I wrote to him, and I think Tom did as well, wrote to him and, asked about potentially working with the Center for UFO Studies. And sure enough, I've still got it stored here somewhere. He sent back the card as a investigator for the Center for UFO Studies, and I think I submitted a couple of interesting reports over the years. The one time I met him too, I had an interest in the Marfa Lights down here in Texas, and it was strange because he went home, and sure enough, a few days later, and I got a letter in the mail, and it had some articles on the Marfa Lights that he must have had some interest in himself. So he was a very open sort of guy. It was always decent with me. And I sent him a case. I think I submitted a case to QFOS that I had come across a pilot who I was on a cruise, I think back in the day, on a trip with my wife's company, and we came across this gentleman who'd been a pilot, and when he realized, my interest in this, told an interesting story about some odd kind of a arrowhead, kind of wedge-shaped object that came up beside him and his co-pilot one day, and very shiny metallic-looking thing that seemed to drop down from one side to the other side and then flew off. And he said when they landed, his co-pilot's eyes were as big as saucers, not having a clue what that was. And I don't know what it was either. But, I filed that report. And I did that for a while. An interesting case I think I described in the book from down here as well that I might have filed it. Unfortunately, when Dr. Hynek passed away, I think my interest kind of, with QFOS, to me, QFOS was Dr. Hynek. And if, you had him behind you, that was something. And I guess I just kind of let it go after that and began to just do things on my own. And eventually heard about the Paul Benowitz thing happening probably in the very early 80s when everybody was getting wind of it. And, really, really began to focus on that. Although I've I've always been the kind to just pick up the phone and call the person. You know, if with Jesse Marcel on the Roswell case, pick up the phone and call him. Just ask him what he saw. So I did the same thing with Paul Benowitz, but and that led into all sorts of other areas. And regrettably, by that time, Center for UFO Studies, I think, seemed to kind of fade as far as an active organization goes. Hynek had retired, and gone on to, I guess, working with the people in Arizona, who I think that kind of became a story in unto itself. But it was interesting, in the fact that he had gone out even to, I mentioned Papua New Guinea, that I think Hynek had gone out to Papua New Guinea some years later on and talked to the people in that particular case. And I'll tell you one peculiar thing that I'd never realized, talk about how things happen. Some years ago, I don't know, a long time ago, I happened to see, and I think it was may have been eBay. I don't think it was Amazon at the time, but somebody had a handset of the investigation and the notes. I think it was Reverend Crutwell had written up a whole set of pages of notes about the Papua New Guinea case and was selling them on eBay. And at the time, I just didn't have the money for it. And it sounds like Rob Mercer finding the Blue Book files that he found on Craigslist. But I wrote to this person and I said, good Lord, what I would do to be able to buy those. These were handwritten notes, like on paper size. And the point was, the person said, you know what, I mean, I'll sell them to whoever comes up with the money. But before I do that, I'll scan you in a PDF copy, all of it. Oh. And I got it. It was superb. And one of the most interesting things was all the notes in there about the other UFO sightings reports that people had made in the area, not just the Papua New Guinea, not just the Father Gill sighting, but other reports that were made. And what was peculiar was some of the sketches that were drawn of what people had seen. And of course, some of them look like the quintessential, flying disc, flying like a frisbee, and this sort of thing. And the reason I bring it up was, though, on one of the pages, they have several of these look like dome disc sketches, but one of them is turned up on edge. And I always struck me because that's exactly the most notable aspect of the things that were in the film Ray Stanford took that I read about in the book, was the fact that these things weren't flying, horizontal like a frisbee. These things were essentially flipped up on edge and flying pancaked right into what you would think is the wind. And to see a sketch of an object like that, and I think there have been plenty of other reports where people have seen objects seem to flip up on their edge, but to see that in one of the sketches that was way back done at the time of the Father Gill sighting that I think it was Norman Crutwell had done was pretty unusual to see that, whoa, somebody else had described seeing a vehicle flying on edge like that. And so then, of course, seeing what Ray had, and it was pretty startling in its own right. But I didn't actually get to see Ray's stuff until 1985. I'm in Austin now myself, and he was living here at the time. And I had driven down here to see his films then, and seeing that thing on a slide screen with a bright blue sky background on it, that changed my thinking about a whole lot. And of course, ultimately led me to kind of keep an eye on things. And I describe a lot of this in the book, but a lot of people who've been in the internet for a while will remember the days of the Skunk Works Digest. It was when every day you could get, people would post to the forum and you could get mail list, groups of the recent comments and recent emails or whatnot that people had submitted to it. And it was even Ray who had mentioned at the time that the more advanced our own technology gets, the harder it's going to be to differentiate between what really would qualify as what I'll just say, a UFO per se, and something of our own, which is a valid point. So if you're not trying to stay up on what we're able to do, it's kind of, you might get lost in what's there. So I began to follow the Skunk Works Digest just to see, these were some aviation enthusiasts who would talk about everything from Area 51 to new aircraft coming out and whatnot. And it was one night I came home from work, and there was this description of this experiment that had been done by a scientist up in the New York area, and showing how he was able to mitigate the shock wave that is ahead of a craft, especially when you're getting up to, Mach 1, Mach 2, those kind of hypersonic speeds. And when I looked at the images that were, he had apparently posted the article on, I don't know if it was the university website, and then of course it got picked up elsewhere. But when I looked at those, if I hadn't been following the Skunk Works just every now and then, just to see what aviation enthusiasts are talking about as far as the new advanced aircraft that are coming out, I wouldn't have seen that article. And that article is what led me to call Ray and say, boy, you should take a look at this. I think somebody either, got into your house and saw your films, or somebody done it, because what this guy has done looks almost exactly like, the basic idea of this vehicle that you got on film. Actually, is one of several, for people that are not aware. I should explain a little bit about that. But then I couldn't pronounce his name, and when Ray goes, oh, that was so-and-so. He was here at my house a few years back looking at the film. And I mean, my jaw about dropped, because it was like, holy cow. But anyway, that's a little bit off the topic of, what Hynek was onto. As far as Hynek is concerned, I don't know. Of course, a lot of people are watching the TV show now.
Right.
And although Aidan Gillen does a superb job, and he's a terrific actor for anyone who'd ever seen Game of Thrones, he's the man.
Yes.
But, and it overall is, not bad. I tend to think that the really good, solid cases become even more compelling than some of the elaborations, on cases are, because of the realization that it is the truth. It is what happened. And that's what makes those cases, that's what keeps the whole thing of interest, is the actual cases that are out there. But as far as, whether Hynek's, and I don't know, it's a catch-22 for Hynek's position, especially with Blue Book, because somebody's paying your way to go around and do all this investigation of something that's fascinating to you, and you don't want to mess with your paycheck.
Right.
Or you lose all of that access if you don't play ball, or at least don't do what they're, I guess you would say, are paying you to go do. And that's a tough predicament to be in. And eventually, I guess, when Blue Book closes, if you were to presume that Hynek went on his merry way and was now free to do and say whatever he wanted, which I don't know if you are forever free, and say and do whatever you want. Mm-hmm. And at the same time, you're in a position of, well, I don't know, it was some of the things that Greg Bishop wrote about Hynek having been used to pass a computer on to Paul Benowitz without telling him that it was coming from the Air Force, something to that effect. And that was a heck of a revelation if that's true. I mean, it supposedly, from my understanding, I think Greg can clarify that, it was something that he was told by Bill Moore, who a lot of people, myself included, would kind of have serious reservations about knowing what to believe, but since he was ostensibly working in cahoots with Doty and whoever else to basically get information on Paul Benowitz and defuse him, if you want to call it that. So I don't know whether you can believe that Hynek actually went along with the idea of getting a computer back in the early 80s to Paul Benowitz without telling him that the Air Force, effectively, I guess you would say, was paying for it. And so you don't really know what was in the software or what was in the computer that they wanted him to have. And Hynek was used as the person to convey it to Paul. But the point is, I don't know. You don't know whether they just played Hynek and said, hey, we don't want everybody to know we're giving this to Paul. And Hynek may have thought it was a totally nice thing to do and been willing to help, but give it. So I don't think it's right to pass judgment on things when you weren't there and you really don't have the facts.
Right.
But beyond that, of course, the part of everything that I'm sure Hynek was as frustrated about, that I'm not an expert on these areas, but when he was going to set up another organization after he'd retired and he had gone to Arizona, and there were people there who I guess had other motives or were not as stand up as they might have been, and that whole idea seemed to fall apart and led to some, I think, a little bit of ridicule, and I guess Hynek at some point backed out of that. I don't recall the whole story. But one of the things that I think occurred was the APRO files may have ended up either going to Hynek or going to QFOS or somehow getting involved in, from what the story goes that I've heard, is those people, a man and a woman, I believe, who were in with Hynek at the time, ended up in possession of those files, and they've gone. Nobody's seen them since. Supposedly they may be in a warehouse stored somewhere, and nobody in ufology who would like to get their hands on them, like you and me and Bob Marler and everybody else.
Yeah.
Who knows where they are? They were just handed off to somebody. Somebody ended up in possession of them, and I would like to find those files for sure. But
I think you have a lot of people, that would join forces in attempts to try to find them. But I want to go back. We've got a question in chat, but I want to ask you first a little bit about Tommy Bland and his friendship with Hynek. Tommy is. I've talked with you about him before, and I would love to have the opportunity to speak with him, but he wrote a book with Nelson Pacheco called Unmasking the Enemy. And so tell me, can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, I want to defer to Tom, and because anything that I say that I've known about and that I've been told by Tom, of course, becomes what I recall and what I hear. So I don't want anyone to hold me to account,
right.
Because Tom can talk more about this. But of course, many people can see a lot of ramifications or even interpretations. And I want to make a point that I think is very important, which is I don't think there's any reason right now to assume that just because we call this whole conglomeration UFO phenomenon, that means it all fits in one pot. I mean, I think there's every bit of reason to segregate certain things or think that, well, wait a minute, there might well be some other, you call it ET if you want, from somewhere out in space that manages to get here. But I don't think there's any reason to deny that time seems to be either not what we perceive it to be, or it's our own stilted thinking about time and what might be out there that makes us not consider that that doesn't come up in conversation as much as the whole ET hypothesis does. But I think there's maybe every good reason to believe that there's alternative things happening here or different things coming along, and we're just seeing it. Well, I'll give you the analogy. People talk about psychic phenomenon, but wait, even that was broken down into clairvoyance, telepathy, psychokinetic types of things. So there's different aspects of things that may all actually end up tying together. And I wouldn't at all be surprised if they do in that particular case, since it seems to be more of a human experiential thing. But anyway, the point is there some thing that we would perceive as we would call it a religious, aspect to UFO phenomenon? Well, I don't think you can doubt it. You can look at the Bible, and there are several things in there that you would look at and say, that's what we would consider UFO phenomenon today. But as far as the book that was written, my understanding is that Nelson Pacheco had the most, did the most as far as writing and putting it and compiling it together. Tom helped. Tom provided information. Tom did research. But I think it would be useful or helpful for people to understand that not everything not all of the diehard or dire religious implications or tone to the book necessarily means that that's exactly what Tommy thinks. So even though the book tended to be one, and the title itself seems very conspiratorial, unmasking the enemy. I don't want, from my understanding with Tom, it's like, yeah, we can all talk about these things, but the book I guess in many cases we've all seen those situations where, like a film, the screenplay was terrific, but the director gets hold of it, and the movie that ends up hitting the screen isn't necessarily what the screenplay was or what the writer necessarily intended. So things tend to get changed if you're not in complete control of it. And but needless to say, it's an intriguing book. And
it is, and
it would be worth looking at and seeing, at least taking out of it the parts that that fit, with whatever your convictions are.
Absolutely, and it's interesting, and I bring it up because I've had Nick Redfern on the show many times, and he wrote a book called Final Events, And in that book, he mentions specifically Unmasking the Enemy and a group called the Collins Elite, and the religious inclination of this group, and it is that the religious aspect plays an important element in what we see now currently in ufology. And I've been dying to get a copy of Unmasking the Enemy. And every time I look online, it's, $1,000 because there were 100 printed. But it is fascinating. I would tell people to definitely look into that.
And I don't think there's any possible way to avoid the religious implications of the UFO phenomena, whatever aspect of it you look at it, whether it's ET or time, because so all of our existence up until just recently, when even from my understanding, the Vatican began to acknowledge other planets out there, other worlds out there, you begin to realize that, well, just because we might not have been told about all of this, that we can't limit, if you believe that there's a God, you can't limit God just based upon what we thought or what was written about in the Bible. If he's got a lot more going on than he told us, maybe it's just because we weren't ready, or maybe it didn't bother him that we didn't know everything. But if we do find some other intelligences out here, there's some other life that was beyond us, whether it's other dimensions or somewhere else, that's going to take some real fast thinking and adjusting of religious viewpoints on any number of levels. And I don't doubt that, like in the movie Contact, you're going to have plenty of people who are just going to suddenly turn around and claim, "Oh, it's all Satan," or "It's all the devil."
Right.
Because
and the thing that's concerning to me is people will use that as a control system. And granted, we don't have a clue what we're dealing with. We really don't. But our people that have belief systems, are they steering the narrative to create fear?
But that's,
in all of us.
Believe me, it's in politics, it's in this, it's in everything else. It divides people to make sure that you maintain control over those who need to believe or need something to believe in and are convinced, by it.
It's fascinating. I want to talk a little bit more about that, but we're going to take our first big break. Evening. I am Erica Lukes here with Christian Lambright, and please go to Amazon. You can get X Descending. It is an excellent book, and it's one of my must-reads. So go out and get it tonight. We will be right back.
Listen very carefully.
This is Houston. Say again, please. Houston, we've had a problem.
This is UFO Classified, live every Friday night, 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern, exclusively on the KCOR Digital Radio Network. The truth is out there, just waiting to be discovered.
And now, if you will, accompany me on a journey to the future.
For more information on the host of UFO Classified, Erica Lukes, upcoming guests, as well as links to the past shows,
visit her website at ufoclassified.com.
UFO Classified.
UFO Classified.
This is KCOR Las Vegas, home of the Digital Radio Network, broadcasting from a shack just south of Area 51.
Wait, that doesn't exist.
This is the KCOR Digital Radio Network. Now for the news.
The disc landed at a ranch at Corona, New Mexico. The rancher turned it over to the Air Force. Rancher W.W. Brazell was the man who discovered the saucer.
What I thought was a star began coming in my direction at a very rapid rate of speed.
The unidentified object, which some sources thought might be a blimp, moved slowly down the Pacific coast from Santa Monica and disappeared south of Long Beach.
I saw a UFO, and it went down the river, turned right at the United Nations, turned left, and then down the river.
UFO Classified.
UFO Classified.
No more plausible deniability. Fact, fiction, or the truth. You decide. And now, the new voice of the high desert, the hostess of UFO Classified, Erica Lukes.
Welcome back to the second half of UFO Classified. I'm Erica Lukes. I was happy to be here, and I want to just let Lib know that I will be asking your question about Hynek in a second, but I am back with Christian Lambright, who is a former investigator for the Center of UFO Studies, QFOS, and a contributor to the Computer UFO Network. He holds a degree in psychology from Baylor University and is a graphic artist and illustrator. He's author of an amazing book called X Descending, which I've been talking about, where he deals with disinformation, broaches two fantastic films, one by Paul Benowitz and then the other, Ray Stanford. And both of these films capture things that are absolutely unexplainable. And there was fallout, especially with Paul Benowitz, and we'll get to that in a little bit. But welcome back to the show. And I have to say that to talk with somebody that actually knew Hynek and that worked with him, and you had that insight, I think that's a really, really cool thing. Thank you for sharing.
That's quite all right. But I do want to say, I don't want anybody to pretend that, Hynek saw me as some protege, that sort of thing. I mean, I respected him. He sent me information. He was always very friendly. I guarantee you, if you want more anecdotal stories and funny stories to tell, Tommy Bland would be the guy to have on. He and Linda, they were a lot of fun. Still are great people. They live in Florida, but Tommy seemed, and to this day is an unusual thing to me, that Tommy seemed to know everyone. And I've repeated this other times. People would talk to him that wouldn't talk to me, or for some reason he'd pick up the phone and call him and they would talk. So he seemed to always have information and knowledge and facts about people that you wouldn't believe. I mean, it was amazing to me, but he had been here, there, and everywhere, and was really good friends with Hynek, far better than I was in this short amount of time before Hynek finally passed away. But I liked him. He was friendly and funny, and he always seems to be. Everybody sees him as, Hynek, the Close Encounters man. But from what stories Tom would tell, he could be a lot of fun too.
It looked like he had a good time, and that was like he seems like a character. And there were a couple films that I saw where he went over to Norway, right when Project Heshtalen was coming, the up and coming place, and he called that a UFO laboratory, a living laboratory. And I thought that was so cool. And it is interesting to see the way the History Channel has created his persona. And I think obviously there are some liberties that have been taken with cases and maybe relationships in the story, but that's it's just interesting. But I do have a question from Libertas in chat, and he wanted to know, did you ever talk with Hynek, or did Hynek mention any of the disinformation?
Not that I recall specifically. Most of the talk of disinformation I seem to have heard or seen, or you see it gathered from different places, and in some cases you don't know whether it's not knowing everything about, like we mentioned earlier, Hynek had been involved for a long time with connections into the Air Force and other governmental agents through his work as an astronomer, as well as through Project Blue Book. And even you had mentioned that at what point do you need people to stand up? And I guess that in the long run is kind of what people respected a lot about Hynek, was that there got to a point, and I think you're seeing that presented in the recent TV series, that it got to a point where he knew that there's something else going on here, even if the Air Force had strict orders, or that was their job, was to debunk everything. But once again, it's like, as far as the disinformation that goes on, believe me, if you go back and look at some of the information, especially there was I guess you would say a book that was going to be written by Hector Quintanilla. And I've got a PDF copy of it. I don't think it was ever published, but he had begun to write about his I don't know what you would call it, his remembrances from his time at Blue Book there. But you do definitely get the sense that there was some serious contention between Hynek, the scientist who's out there trying to find out what's going on, even though he's on the payroll, or at least they're covering his bills when he travels. But there was some serious contention between Hynek and the Air Force men. Moody, I think, is one of the names. Moody was involved in Socorro as well, but he was there at the time. And even Quintanilla talks about some of the disagreements that went on. So if you have to believe that that was actually true, then you begin to wonder, well, how much would they have been telling Hynek? How much would they really have told him of what was going on if they thought this guy is basically a civilian scientist out here, and even though he's working for us to potentially look for, I guess you would say, astronomical explanations, if they were butting heads already, even back in the day, would you necessarily just reveal everything to a civilian scientist, not just because you're military and potentially you've got classified information on your end that you're not supposed to give out, but if you thought Hynek's going to go out and make public statements that may be contrary or contradictory to what you're trying to convince the public to think, something, I have to feel that at some point Hynek would begin to see that himself. And I think we picked that up in the TV show, and I think you pick it up in some of the things that have been written over the years about it. That was it disinformation Hynek was involved in, or was it disinformation that he might have realized he's not, he's being expected to toe the party line, but it's not true. But what he's seeing deserves far more consideration, and the witnesses aren't lying. They're telling exactly what they saw, and it deserves more than just having being brushed off as swamp gas or a flock of geese or whatever the Air Force was trying to explain away. And it's interesting because when Hynek went to Socorro, whatever you might, he obviously was not an investigator. He was an astronomer, and he's out there. And I think it's some of the things I've read. He realized his job was to see this in more of a social aspect, the societal aspect, than necessarily to be a chief forensic investigator and do some of the things that that other people might have done. But from what I understand, some of the things that were written about, that were said by Richard Holder Sr., who was the Army investigator at the time, who, from everything that I've seen and read and having spoken with his son now, he was a very conscientious man. Later on, he became a pastor, a preacher, and he believed there was something else going on there. But he believed when the Blue Book investigators came, their job, and I think it was written kind of this way, their job was to discredit the witness, which seems rather contrary if you're supposed to be going in open-minded to do an investigation. And I've wondered whether that's part of the contention Hynek had with some of the Blue Book investigators as well, which is an outsider seeing this with open eyes sees a lot more of what's really going on, and that there's potential that needs to be investigated here. Whereas the Blue Book guys, maybe they saw it, maybe they didn't, but maybe more like the gentleman in the television show, you salute to your bosses and you say what you're supposed to say, even if it's going to drive a wedge in some cases, perhaps between them and Hynek himself. But Hynek, you still wonder, at some point how much of, it's like we were talking about earlier, people have to pay their bills, at some point in Hynek's case, and perhaps even to the extent of Bill Moore, which people might be questionable, have questions about him, but you can't not see his point that he made in his the Las Vegas kind of his revelation, admission, whatever you want to call it, which was if he had his foot in the door, the only way he's going to get information from inside is to keep that door open as much as he can. Same thing potentially with Hynek in this case. If he knew he was getting the chance to go out and do these investigations under the purview of his working with the Air Force, and that's the only way to keep your foot in the door, then you may have to, in some cases, swallow your pride, just do the job, try to do the best you can to keep your bosses on the Air Force side happy, even if you may realize at this point that once they realize you're beginning to think the other way, you're beginning to see things differently, why would they necessarily share open information with you that they're getting? I mean, if you look at the Socorro case and you look at what was done afterwards and you look at the investigation that was put into trying to solve that thing and explain it away, and at the end of the day, they couldn't, almost purely because of Zamora's integrity and the evidence that was already out there. The Army had been there, the FBI had been there, all that work had been done. People got there very quickly. Ray Stanford got there and had the smarts to realize when Lonnie told him, look, there's a rock that looks like the landing gear on the vehicle, scrape that rock. Why wouldn't you immediately grab it? Well, fortunately, Ray was there. And Ray, sharp as a tack as he is, got that rock. Of course, he writes about that in his book, so people can buy his book and read that. It's well worth the money for certain. But the point is, at some point, you realize, now you're dealing with the Air Force. They're trying to disinform people, if you want to say, by just writing off, if it's possible aircraft, later on it becomes aircraft, that sort of thing, which is dismissive of everything that's out there. But I don't recall specific, to answer the question, if it was specifics, and maybe I'm not sure what they mean by disinformation. I don't, to me, Hynek never blatantly discussed disinformation that was going on, back at the time.
And granted, as you have progressed with your research and you got involved with Benowitz and learned about the goings-ons with that case, you saw disinformation at its finest. And I mean, I can't imagine actually having the opportunity to have spoken with him and seeing some of the players and seeing the lengths at which they were willing to go to keep a lid on this. And for people who don't understand who Benowitz is, could you give us just a brief rundown?
Paul Benowitz owned a company in Albuquerque, New Mexico, that is still there today, run by his sons. Made, I know I'm going to get this wrong, but sensing equipment, barometric humidity sensing equipment, whatever. They had contracts with military and lots of people. So the company's doing well. But he was also a pretty sharp inventor. And that was kind of his specialty. But so he was doing very well and lived in what's called the Four Hills section of Albuquerque, which is just east of Albuquerque itself, in an area that actually looks right down over the Manzano, what they referred to as Manzano Weapons Storage Area. It's the little Manzano Mountains. It's about 3 miles long, stretching from kind of north to south. And that whole area is basically Kirtland Air Force Base, fenced-in areas, Department of Defense, where they do research on everything from directed energy weaponry to to radar stuff, whatever they do down there. The point was, these Manzano Mountains actually housed, back in the day, nuclear materials, nuclear weapons. You could actually get a pair of binoculars and look and see the bunkers that, if you go on Google Maps or Google Satellite View, aerial view, you can actually see the roadway all around it. It used to have a double perimeter fence, electrified fence. I was told by one person, kind of intended that if you got into one side and touched one side, it'd fall in on you, so you're stuck. But it was in fact, I think I read an article one time, it's considered one of the most secure places in the entire country. But from the Four Hills section, and Paul's house was a 2-story house with a third, the rooftop, so to speak. It's kind of the adobe looking, very, very nice area. But from his rooftop, he had a broad view of the entire area. Now, he had gotten interested in the subject because back in the day, cattle mutilations in the whole area around, and the Dulce area, which everybody knows of, Chama and those areas, there was a whole lot of interest in strange things flying around, up there. Gay Valdez became well known because he was kind of patrolled the Indian reservation at the, in that area. And Paul Benowitz had gotten interested in that and actually had gone up there and gotten some very unusual films. I tried the best I could to document this and put his actual photographs in the book. And at some point, he came home one night after he'd been up there 2 or 3 times and been out with his son and filming things. But he came home one night and his wife mentioned something odd about a noise above the house and the dog barking, something to this effect. And apparently with Paul's already pre-existing interest in this subject, he began to wonder if whatever he'd been paying attention to maybe had kind of begun to pay attention to him, and somehow found where he was in Albuquerque and had been around there. So he, it's unusual story, but it makes some kind of odd sense when you think of it that way, that he wondered if maybe what his wife heard was a symptom of something he'd been poking around in up north in the Dulce area that had come back and followed him. So he got up on his roof, totally happenstance, and I think it was very, very cold in that date and time. And the best I could track it back must have been around mid-December 79 when he's up on his roof, 19 degrees. The only two people that I remember thinking that seemed to have that kind of determination, or whatever you want to call it, to be out there in freezing weather were Paul Benowitz and Ray, back when he ran Project Starlight, and had told me times when they'd be sleeping in camping, gear and frost on you and that whole thing. But for whatever reason, somehow Paul happened, I think he was just there in the right place, but not at the right time. Nobody assumed anybody would be out there on their roof in the dark of night, no moon, freezing weather. And he happened to see some odd glowing somethings in the distance near the base of the Manzano weapons storage area. And so over the next few nights, he began to watch these things jump up, burst brightly, lift up to about 300 feet, and shoot off around the end of the mountain. And there were 4 objects. One was about twice the size of the others, as best he could tell, and he began to get his camera equipment. He had a Hasselblad with a telephoto lens, I believe, some sort of film camera that he could use. I think it had a 6-degree lens on it, and another camera mounted on a telescope that he was able to get pictures of these things on the ground and film footage of them jumping up and taking off and flying away. They'd sometimes be out there when he got out, between 10 and midnight. They'd already be there. They might sit there for several hours before they suddenly jump off and go. At one point, his wife came out and they watched, and he was even able to tell her by some small, strange effect that would occur, where would be a bright flash, and within a few seconds or 10 seconds or so later, he knew that's when they would take off. And he was even able to describe his wife to his wife, saying, okay, watch, here they go. So you clearly have multiple witness sightings of this, he and his wife. And in some cases, I think one case she described having seen what they thought must be the lights of the Jeeps, maybe the security guards that seemed to drive by the perimeter close to where they thought these things were, but they didn't do anything. So they didn't know what to think. Could they see them, or did they know they were there and they were just going on by? And Paul had described also one time seeing what he swore he thought, it looked like a flashlight, somebody with a flashlight walking around, underneath where one of these things were. But eventually, and I didn't ever get the impression that it may have been gone on for more than a week's time. But after he had used some film that was still in the camera from his trips up to Dulce, and by the time he got it developed, so it must have been sometime in January, and I think that's proven by a statement that Ernest Edwards had wrote later that said first contact with Paul Benowitz, January of 1980. Paul decides he best call the Air Force, because if there's no sirens going off, no alarms, he wasn't even sure if they were aware that there were these things intruding, I guess you could say, into the area where these nuclear weapons were being stored. So he called the Air Force, asked to speak with whoever's in charge, and got put in touch with Ernest Edwards. Ernest Edwards, this is the interesting thing you have to realize. There don't seem to be any documents that have ever been released that I've seen that cover this first, sounds like 4-month, 5-month period where he first called and got Ernest Edwards, who ultimately put him in touch with Richard Doty, who then went and talked to Paul. And it's very clear this was in the early part of 1980. But the only documents that we've ever seen seem to attest to August, September, in the fall, when, for whatever reason, that's when Jerry Miller went up there. And if you read the documents, it's written to make you think Paul was somebody who was also interested in the stuff that around the time of the Kirtland documents and the security guard sightings. But no, Paul was the one who started it all when he called him early in January. But we don't have anything about it then. There seems to be no record to document when Paul got his films. I just happened to call him because at some point I realized, wait a minute, everything in the documents they're making him out to sound kind of crazy. I mean, why would you invite a guy down to Kirtland Air Force Base at a meeting with a brigadier general and a number of other people if all he's screaming is that, oh, there's aliens everywhere? That made no sense to me. So I called him. And in talking, of course, this was a few years later, it was towards the middle of the 80s, but in talking to him by that time, he was saying some things that were pretty hard to swallow. And I finally asked him, I said, well, why did you call the Air Force to begin with? I mean, what made you call it? Oh, it was the films that I got. That was the first I'd heard about it. And I was like, wait, what films? Oh, well, the ones of the objects, the ones I took from my roof. Never heard, I had known nothing about those. And to my understanding, not many people, if many at all, even really were aware that that's what he called the Air Force about. And that's where everything started. He got it on film. Most of everything else, when he got his computer and all the communications supposedly he got, that's when you realize, wait a minute, the cat was out of the bag by that time. And once Doty and everyone else found out, that's when the fix was in. If you want to talk about disinformation, yeah, that's the next 10 years was full of it. But he got the films, and those are the images that were in the book. I did my best to enhance them and to show what's actually in there and what caused all the stir and what he got. But for whatever reason, when he called the Air Force and told them what he got on film, I guess the only way I can put it is they went after him. They didn't go after, my take on it has been, it's like if you call the mafia up and tell them, oh yeah, you saw them committing whatever crime what it was, who do you think they're going to go after?
Wow.
And I even asked him, I said, don't you think you let the cat out of the bag? And he said, when you called him and told him what you had, and he just said, well, you can't be too paranoid. Maybe not, but he should have, it turns out in this particular case, as Doty has said later on, that they targeted Paul. So I think he got something that they definitely knew was there. It was him that was not supposed to be there. But it's an intriguing story and sad story in many ways. And he, I don't think, was treated fairly. And to have Richard Doty come out now and say, well, Paul was a patriot and, raise the flag, and people like that are easy to fool. And I don't know how many veterans would like to hear that, but Doty said it on film in the Mirage Men video documentary, if you want to call it that. And I don't know. Anyway.
Wow.
You can ask the questions and I'll answer if I can.
Well, I mean, and that is really sad that obviously Benowitz felt that he was actually communicating with these people and that there was some cohesive relationship and that he was being patriotic and doing the right things. It's very, very sad. I am Erica Lukes here with Christian Lambright. His book is X Descending. We will take a break and be right back.
Stand by.
This is UFO Classified with Erica Lukes.
Erica Lukes.
The phone lines are open now at 702-425-9230. That's 702-425-9230. Worldwide callers use Skype name KCOR Radio. More UFO Classified.
UFO Classified.
With Erica Lukes on the KCOR Digital Radio Network. After this.
You love them enough to do anything for them.
Dad, can we make 200 cookies for my bake sale tomorrow?
Let's do this. Including checking nhtsa.gov/the right seat to make sure they're correctly buckled in the back seat. Brought to you by the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration and the Ad Council.
We interrupt this program to annoy you and make things generally irritating.
At the end of the day, we turn the lights down in the KCOR studio.
Oh, sweet.
And crank up the hottest club songs from around the world.
This is the future.
The Grind, mixed by Tina Marie, your Vegas vixen of the high desert.
What about the body? What kind of body?
Good body, nice body.
Every night from 11 p.m. to 2 a.m. Pacific. The best 3 hours of commercial-free music.
New music first.
It's time to stand up and dance your ass off. The Grind, nightly and exclusively on the KCOR Digital Radio Network.
Come on, it's kind of hot.
30 seconds and counting.
Broadcasting to you from another planet, beaming you a world of entertainment.
This is the
the world-famous KCOR. Now listen live online at KCORradio.com.
I like everything about this station.
When do I listen? Like 24 hours a day.
It's my favorite station. I just love the music. It keeps me going at work.
There is a world outside that which we live in, a realm where fact and fiction collide. The Paradigm Matrix. The Paradigm Matrix. Hosted by Willie Miranda every Friday night at 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern.
The Matrix is everywhere. It is all around us, even now in this very room.
The 1-hour show that will surely leave you hanging on the edge of the rabbit hole. The Paradigm Matrix explores a universe of topics from UFOs, cryptozoology, conspiracies, as well as all things paranormal.
Enter a world of the twisted and deformed.
Friday night, 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern. The Paradigm Matrix, exclusively on the KCOR Digital Radio Network, where fact and fiction collide.
Here's what happened on the last episode of Three Guys, No Ties.
Idiots. A Georgia man was busted for allegedly force-feeding a goat cocaine and whiskey. Do you believe that anybody would do that to an animal?
Well, he's trying to get his date kind of warmed up, isn't he?
Sergio Guzman, 28, horse trainer, was caught on camera holding a little guy's horn while a pal shoved drugs in its nostrils.
What was the point?
Why would you give an animal drugs?
Well, if it was a horse and you wanted to win the race,
but this was a goat.
That's my point. That's why I'm asking why.
Because they're sad, you know.
I guess.
Three Guys, No Ties. Wednesday nights, 7 to 9 Pacific on the KCOR Digital Radio Network.
You're listening to UFO Classified with Erica Lukes, where the truth isn't hidden beneath the black lines of a Sharpie.
That's the craziest thing I've ever heard.
To be on with Erica, call 702-425-9230. That's 702-425-9230. Worldwide callers use Skype name KCOR Radio.
Radio contact.
Share your thoughts on the show on Twitter by using hashtag KCOR. Or head over to the live chats at KCORradio.com.
The audience goes nuts.
And now, your host of UFO Classified.
Are you ready?
Erica Lukes.
Erica Lukes.
Welcome back to the final segment of UFO Classified. I'm always just happy to be here, and I love the questions and conversations in chat. Next week is going to be a great show, and I will be announcing that in a couple days on my website. But if you want to find me, you can go to ufoclassified.com or find me on Facebook under UFO Classified. Occasionally I tweet, but I don't know what. That just kind of bores me, so what can I say? I am here tonight with someone who was talking about a really important case. He wrote a book. Christian Lambright is author of X Descending, which is about two extraordinary films that reveal lies, deception, and the truth about unidentified flying objects. You can get that on Kindle, and I would recommend that highly. But we were talking about Paul Benowitz and the way that he approached the Air Force and then was subsequently treated by them and reeled in. And I mean, the more you learn about this, it's just shocking, and it's sad that they would go to the lengths to do what they did to him.
Yeah, once again, I mean, I keep in mind, when we're talking military government budgets, it's tough to try to sound high and mighty and say, I mean, I will never say that I think what happened to Paul was just, hey, that was the way it is. I don't think that was fair at all. I mean, it's not in a country we're in that you expect to go try to do the right thing and have them come at you over it, or just because there's some secret somewhere. I've always been a believer that, if there's good reason for something, tell me what it is. If I'll honor the oath and be quiet if that's as long as you can show me that's a good reason. But if it's just to cover your tail on something, don't try to convince me that, oh, this is, a government secret and you now have to be quiet. I mean, what happened to the land of the free where you speak your mind? Because that's the only way everybody learns what the truth is. Although I realize that there are times that, we do have national secrets that deserve to be kept. If somebody would come out and say, this was, but once again, there's the whole issue. It's a technology thing. Are we hiding it from the Chinese and the Russians? Are we hiding it from somebody else? Are we hiding it from the public? Or is it, as we were discussing earlier, somebody's now going to have a commercial interest in inventing something that they can make a ton of money on, and that's why they're trying to keep it secret. But it sounds good to say it's a national security matter. We're trying to keep these secrets from the Russians or whatever else. You don't know. But at some point, if we have the technology of the vehicles that Paul was filming, but if somebody has the technology of the vehicles that Ray has filmed, and not just the one I've wrote about in the book, there are other ones that I hope everyone gets a chance to see. And it's not just me saying that. There are other people who have been there far more qualified than me, who have seen what Ray's got on film, and his recent success with his dinosaur discoveries, the dinosaur track discoveries, and the accolades that he's gotten from that. If nothing else, prove his eyesight and his awareness and his acuity and his ability to recognize, as he told me once, patterns in chaos is way beyond the average. But at the same time, he's just aware. When I first met him, he carried that film camera with him everywhere. I've got one, but I end up kind of forgetting to carry it with me at times, and I'm looking busy. Ray pays attention, and that's why he has had, over the years, some really good success at seeing things that are there, but other people may not be paying attention or have not gotten on film. But he's got the good stuff to it. It's just, that's the kind of thing that I think we need to be made aware of. I mean, we slowly hear about Mars. We slowly hear about other planets. We slowly hear about other things. Even these days, you have some fairly renowned scientists who are willing to come out and say, the recent, I guess if everybody recognizes the term Oumuamua, that odd looking, what they think must have been some kind of asteroid or something that came out of our solar system and drifted around our sun. And we have a recent, I think it's a Harvard scientist who's openly speculated that he wonders whether this might not have been some, extraterrestrial alien, some type of vehicle that happened to be drifting by. Maybe it was a probe of, some sort or other. But he's willing to step up and state what he thinks, even in the face of peers who may wonder about it. I tend to think, the shape of the thing is something that I recognize in some of the things that I wonder that Ray might have had, have filmed at times. But the point is, we have a much more open, societies willing to discuss them, even though I realize, you're going to get into all sorts of complications with people believing one thing or the other. We've seen too many Hollywood movies where their aliens are here to suck out your brains, and the panic might, that might come about. That may be a good reason for, for keeping it quiet or playing it slowly. But I think it's time that the public be aware of some of the really good evidence that's there, that they don't get, unfortunately, as you and I talked about, people wonder, well, why doesn't Ray show his evidence? Well, we talked about that, the things that people do and say because they haven't had a chance to see it, trolling, whatever you want to call it, negativists, naysayers, people just out to, and at that point, I have several friends who've decided, forget it. I'm just going to fly under the radar and be friends with the people I work with and not raise my head up enough because I just don't want to hear it and I don't want to deal with it. And unfortunately, the minute you put something out there that you don't have a chance to carefully explain, which Ray is rightfully and very willingly willing to do, he invites people to come see his material. And that's how a lot of people who, I wish I could name some of them, but some of them are known, but I've been told of several people qualified people who've been to see what Ray has. But if Ray just puts it out there without the ability to at least tell you, like writing it in a peer-reviewed journal, like his success with the dinosaur tracks, came a long time after he'd had a hand with other well-known paleontologists to author articles on it, because they wanted it out there and Ray could get his name in there, and then now we all see it. But I remember years ago when he told me about what is now at the Goddard Space Science, a big exhibit there, when he told me that he'd seen this thing, but other people walk right by it. And it was years later before it finally became publicly, acknowledged. So he's very careful about how he shows what he shows and tells what he thinks. But he's, to my knowledge, has never refused to show it to anybody. He just wants a chance to present it to you so he can show you what's there and what he studied it for so long that he's seen things that are there. Because in many cases, as I mentioned to you earlier, it's one of those things that when you see it, I'll give you an example. I have some of his images here. One of them is a very profound one that I know Richard Dolan has seen, other people have seen. And at one point I put it on my screen. I had my laptop, and a friend, a girl I know well, and I said, just look at this. And she sat there for about 30 seconds and suddenly exclaimed, whoa. When she got it, oh, she saw it. You won't unsee it. But I understand everyone's reluctance. I really do. I understand that when you can't see it for yourself or you haven't seen it and you hear things being said about it, it's aggravating to not, I've had the same argument with Ray many times, how to present it, and then it'll be something. And I can't, I get it, because we see that too much time these days. People just start backbiting and arguing and calling names and poking fun. And I've gotten a lot of that. People that say, well, Ray thought this or Ray thought that. Well, how many of us don't have, things that we used to think one way and now we feel differently about it? But it doesn't change. But that's not what's on film. In other words, that's not what the evidence. The point is what the evidence shows. So I really hope he will present more of that, and I hope people will. What I put in my book is just one, maybe two images that I illustrated, because at the time I just couldn't get Ray to see his way to let me, put one in there. Although he's mentioned it a few times afterwards. Maybe if I do a second edition, I'll be able to put one of the actual pictures in there. But I saw them years ago when it was all pictures before it was computerized and you could actually enhance them digitally. And the story that I wrote about in the book about some of the discoveries and the things that have been published elsewhere by a guy who actually was well qualified and went and saw them and saw not just what I saw, but plenty more in it. But that in itself proves that this evidence is there. It just doesn't always get into the hands where the public can look at it. And unfortunately, as you've observed as well, you can't always say if there's been such an attempt to hold down public awareness of this. If you can call it disinformation, you can call it whatever you want. But if there's been so much effort by whomever, whether it's government agencies, intelligence, whoever, if there's been that much effort, you can't be sure whether the people that are trying to undermine a person by attacking his personality or his character or any of the kinds of things we hear about in ufology all the time, is that just normal people going back and forth, or is that actually more of the Paul Benowitz type cause contention and disinformation and confuse the issue so nobody knows what to believe anymore, and eventually you just wander off, you just drop it. But I would reassure people that, not everything I've seen that Ray's got, and he understands, not everything is going to be stuff that you want to show people because, it doesn't have that wow factor. But he has got, the best I can say is you don't have to take my word for it. There are plenty of people out there who've seen it and know what it is. And I could make some more specifics, but I want to keep the friends I've got. I don't want to undermine anybody else either.
Right.
But I can make some pointers right now to things that were written about in the DIA Bigelow ATIP thing that I could probably connect some dots that would potentially get back to Ray's film, the one I wrote about.
Wow.
Most people won't make the connection because it's not quite put that way, in the documentation that you see, but I hope he will. And I'm hoping maybe if I get to my second my second documentary I'm working on, that maybe I'm trying to talk to Ray and see if we can maybe do something with some of the stuff he's got, just to show people that it really is there. The truth is out there, to borrow a phrase from the X-Files.
Absolutely. And I have to ask you, because you have dealt with Ray, and because you were investigating what happened with Benowitz, did you ever have any experiences where you felt that you were being monitored?
Not that I knew of. So if they were doing it to me, they were doing it well. I had some odd experiences with, I think I mentioned this to you once before, with working on the book, and I don't recall the exact point I was working on, but there was something I was doing, and a guy walked through a coffee shop. I was the only one in there, and a big black gentleman came in on one side, never seen him before, walked around the other side, and as he began to go past me out the door, he stopped and looked at me. And some people who are familiar with a lot more than just remote viewing would recognize the name Ed Dames. And I don't even recall what I was writing about at that moment or looking into, but when he walked by me and he just slowed down and looked at me and said, "Do you know Ed Dames?" And that caught me. Why would somebody... I was in Waco at the time, at a coffee shop, not even downtown, and I was the only one there. I'd go in there and sit and write, and they had Wi-Fi. To have somebody just out of the blue walk by and make that comment, it's almost like just letting you know without really spelling. So I don't know. It was a strange kind of feeling, but it did tend to make me, guard copies of the book and not really let anybody see what was there until I got to a point where I finally had a good friend of mine proofread it for me. But I never felt specific. But I don't know. These days, why do they need to follow you? These days, they can pick up everything you're doing and seeing and emailing and texting and writing on Facebook and your cell phones broadcasting it across the airwaves. If somebody wants to just keep up on what you're doing, that would be the way to do it. My feeling back in the day was part of the reason when the Paul Benowitz thing was going on, before really everybody had cell phones and everybody, the internet was a big thing. Part of the reason for letting Richard Doty's name get out there, putting his name out there for everybody to find, was because it was the candle that drew the moths. Anybody who wanted to find out anything about what the Air Force knew about the Kirtland documents at some point is going to end up calling Richard Doty.
Right.
If you were a serious person, if you were fly by night, why would they care? But at some point, if you call Richard Doty, now your name gets added to a list. I assume that's one way for them to at least be aware of how far the information is spreading outside Kirtland and who's doing what, and ultimately maybe who might be serious enough that they need to be aware of. But I don't know. I think maybe that was part of why. I don't know. I mean, I'm not one to want to make myself out to be important in any particular way, but I've often wondered whether that was how John Lear came into the picture.
And John Lear is a very interesting character.
Yeah, it's a story in itself. Very funny guy, nice guy, but then you wonder, right? At some point, I don't know what to say about him, but I wish him well. But anyway, that's, I tried to explain everything I could and to put every detail that I could recall and work out into the book, and especially in the addendums. If you look at the addendums where I wrote about Laos, Richard Doty and John Lear in Laos, that I think is important. I mean, beyond just the UFO angle, as far as the intelligence game or who's maybe working behind the scenes, different sides of the fence where you think one's a, I don't know if you want to call it good cop, bad cop, or pro-UFO, anti-UFO, and you wonder maybe they're all on the same side of the fence, really. But also the directed energy stuff that Paul Benowitz got involved in. There's a section in the back about beamed energy, directed energy being researched and things being done at Kirtland that I think might have a bearing on some of the phenomenon that Paul was experiencing later on that tended to make him seem crazy.
And all of this is interesting, and I just want to point out that in my research, it has been really fascinating to see that names like Lear and people that put Area 51 on the map and and continue to propagate some some interesting stories about things. They're all connected. It's a handful of people over the decades that have been putting out the same stuff, and then they keep reinventing the stories. And so you have to question what their motivations truly are, and who are they working for?
Yeah, well, my opinion changed as I began to work out chronology in this book involving Abinowitz, and who came into the picture when, and how did Bill Moore supposedly being innocently recruited while he was on a travel tour. And now I don't know. I mean, it's just my opinion based on what I put together, but I have a feeling that all of these characters were like in the old movie The Sting, where at the end you realize Robert Shaw was the only one who wasn't in on it. Everybody else and the whole operation was in on it as a sting, and it's just nobody would have believed that everything would have been orchestrated working together. And in this particular case, I began to think, or I do think now, that it wasn't just Doty and Lear, it was Bill Moore as well. It was probably, I don't know what the term you would use, was someone they knew who would help, but looked like, an innocent person out here. I don't know. It's just my opinion, because things didn't add up when I began to look at who and what the story was and how it changed, and when was Bill recruited? Was it then, or was it over here, or was it how he ended up here? And then for 10 years to come back at the end and say, you tried to have your foot in the door and you got nothing.
Right.
But never name the names.
Oh, interesting. And I've got to interrupt you, and I'm sorry. We've got Becky on the phone who has been waiting, and I did not get this message because my Skype is just not my favorite. So if Becky's still there, Tina, if you could put her on, that would be great.
Hello there.
Hello. I am so sorry to keep you waiting.
Oh, no, Erica, I haven't been waiting that long. Thank you so much for taking my call. Your show rocks. Keep up the good work, and I can't wait to get a book about Utah from you, lady.
Oh, you'll be hearing it pretty soon.
Yay, good. Looking forward to that. Chris, I read somewhere, I apologize, I can't come up with the reference, but I swear I saw this in print. You know the saga of the program they did against Paul Benowitz? They gave him a sort of cooked generated the false alien narrative he was tapping into. Something I read said that Hynek gave him that computer. Do you have an opinion on that?
Yeah, I think we touched a little on that earlier, and my understanding, at least, and I will defer. Hopefully, at some point, if he's back on, he can be asked about it as well. It was in Greg Bishop's book, Project Beta, that he wrote, and if I'm paraphrasing wrongly here, he wrote that he had been told by Bill Moore that the Air Force had, and I guess at some point in time, they were communicating with Paul and knew Paul wanted a computer. Of course, they were fairly new back in those days, a new thing. But that the Air Force had gotten Hynek, had given a computer to Hynek for him to pass it on to Paul, but to not tell Paul that it was coming from the Air Force. And obviously, it would be loaded with some kind of software. And from what I understand, or at least the way it appears to me, it was that computer and the software that was on it that ultimately was what Paul began to use to communicate with what he thought were these, were aliens writing back and forth and sending rudimentary images over the computer and this and that sort of thing. Other people have seen some of those images. My friend Tommy Bland, I think, had told me that he had seen some that Paul had given to Gabe Valdez. So there may still be some of those in some of Gabe Valdez's material if his family or his sons have it. But that was something that bothered me and still bothers me. And unfortunately, anybody can say, oh, yeah, Hynek was the one who did it now, because unfortunately, Dr. Hynek's not around to answer it or address it. And what you don't know is, did he realize that he was being used to do that? Or did they simply say, hey, we're trying to help Paul. We want to give him a computer, but we don't want everybody to know we're helping him. And so Hynek may have thought it was a very innocent and helpful thing to do. I don't know. I don't know. I would hope. Something in my heart just tells me I can't really see Dr. Hynek knowingly helping to undermine a guy who was trying to do the right thing and had some film that, I don't know. I just have no knowledge of that. Perhaps somebody can maybe Dr. Hynek's sons, because of the Blue Book films that are coming out now, would have some information on that. Erica, there you go. There's a show.
Yeah.
Talk to them.
Okay.
Or was Bill simply feeding something to Greg, which Greg, was writing information he was told? Was Bill simply saying something to Greg to cast aspersions on Hynek's character after all these years?
Right. Exactly. Chris, are you going to go see Dodie at UFO MegaCon?
I don't think you'd like to see me. I mean, if you were addressing that to me, the conversations that I've ever had with, I would have loved to sit down if I felt he was going to tell the truth. But if you read, the appendix or addendum in my book, I was writing about John Lear, Richard Doty, and Laos. When I found some information about that, only one time when I first talked to him did he say some things that he was speaking, and when I caught him on one point, I don't think he's liked to talk to me much after that. And it's not because I'm not out to get him. I mean, I wish he had information he would share. It's just, I don't know whether he can ever say what went on. He's said things about Paul that I didn't really like hearing, and he's tried to dodge the bullet by saying, he claims he told Paul, I was just doing my job, as though Paul didn't believe him. You know what? Get a different job. You don't need to be going out to somebody when you know he's going over the edge, and for 10 years you keep doing it. But I don't know. But he's made claims to me, and I've just, unfortunately or unfortunately for him, have happened to have information that seemed to catch him on some of those points, and it just never seemed to go well after that. So I don't know. But if he was there and there was a chance to sit and talk, it would be an interesting experience.
Thank you so much for calling in, Becky.
Thanks,
I really
Becky.
appreciate it. And I have to say, absolutely, make sure you get X to sending. I want to have Christian. I want you back on the show. You are incredible, and I want to talk to you some more off the air. Thank you for being here. I will be posting links to the show and to your book, and I hope you have a wonderful weekend. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks, Erica.
Absolutely. Thanks for tuning in tonight, guys. Stick around. Willie Miranda is up next, and we will catch you next week.
Listen very carefully.
This is Houston. Say again, please.
Houston, we've had a problem.
This is UFO Classified, live every Friday night, 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern, exclusively on the KCOR Digital Radio Network. The truth is out there, just waiting to be discovered.
And now, if you will, accompany me on a journey to the future.
For more information on the host of UFO Classified, Erica Lukes, upcoming guests, as well as links to the past shows,
visit her website at ufoclassified.com.
UFO Classified.
UFO Classified.
This is KCOR Las Vegas, home of the Digital Radio Network, broadcast